There's also the idea of CDP, which is a customer data platform, which is different than a DMP, which is a data management platform.
You've got to find what works best for your brand. You've got to measure that against the investments that you can make, the time for deployment. And there's a number of different factors that come into those decisions.
It's maybe less about targeting specific people because everybody likes pizza, but it's maybe more about like, don't show one person 300 ads for pizza, show 300 people one ad for pizza.
I don't know if this is super controversial. Pizza is actually my least favorite cuisine. I think where the waters get muddied somewhat is with privacy and the actual use of first-party data.
Even in a purely contextual context, I think there's lots of opportunity.
Welcome to Decentriq Deconstructs, a series to help marketers navigate the quickly evolving advertising landscape. In each episode, we'll be breaking down the latest in MarTech and ad tech, providing you with the insights you need to stay ahead and connect with your audience. Join us as Decentriq deconstructs complex topics to help you reach your best customers in the new era of digital marketing. Hi everyone, so today we'll be talking about the cookieless journey of brands. So what are brands going to when they see that many of their third-party quality metrics are essentially decreasing? Yes, this is still really important despite Google's announcement, and talking about the different kinds of solutions out there. So some of the ones that we see, of course, are CDPs, contextual advertising, clean rooms, ID solutions, and just essentially talking about how we see the brands approaching these different options. We've seen that some brands have typical patterns that they like to follow, some brands that are using some as a one-stop shop for all, and some brands that have tried some and haven't worked out. So we'll be covering all those topics in this episode. And maybe we can just start off by giving a quick intro to all of them. So Andrew, Dan, what are some of the typical cookieless solutions that you guys see out there?
When people start talking about cookieless, so one of the first things that came to mind for a lot of people was this idea of what is now called context-based targeting, right? To context advertising, which is literally that you just like, you don't track at the individual level. You just base it on what content it's next to. So that's a really straightforward one. There's also the idea of CDP, which is a customer data platform, which is different than a DMP, which is a data management platform. But the biggest difference is that it's a more holistic view of the customer that's not necessarily quite as focused on cookies. But that's sort of like, you just try to collect and use first-party data in a really strong way. But not necessarily in a cookie sort of sense. And also another popular one is data clean rooms and other collaboration spaces where you maybe like join data with other parties and use it in limited ways. And of course, there's also increased focus on ID-based solutions, right? Like universal ID graphs. There's a couple out in market. Different providers with different methodologies and coverage in different areas, but just, trying to stitch together an identity that isn't necessarily based on cookies. Any that I missed, Dan?
No, I think you've covered all the technologies, and for anyone who listened into our first podcast, there's obviously that kind of media mix as well that comes into it, right? How do you think about cookieless approach for in the walled gardens or into the open internet? But in terms of the technology decisions, I think you articulated it perfectly.
And I do think brands do get excited about different ones, and sometimes it like. What they get excited about depends on their position and their experience, what they have. And I do think one of the things that I think about when I think about like how do I prepare for the changing ecosystem and whatever, I think the really important thing is that it's a really big space and there's a lot of opportunity to test and learn and stuff like that. And I think like one of the biggest mistakes you can make is to commit to one strategy too early, right? Honestly, in the sense of like, some people are, I remember a couple of years ago when the first whispers of iOS 14.5 started to come around, people were just like context-based only, full. Like I'm just going full context, nothing else. And, that may be okay, but I just think it's a situation where, it's still in so much flux, right? And like the exact details still change. There's a huge Google announcement recently, and then, that changed how things think about that, but that may shift. It may shift again. I mean, one of the jokes about the ad industry is that, like when you ask people like, why do you like working in the ad industry? Like, oh, it changes all the time. And I think that's a really key thing about this. So I think like, diversity and flexibility, and being able, having multiple avenues to see where things come is a really important approach.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's no one size fits all, right, Andrew? And I think, we're big advocates of that kind of test and learn approach. You've got to find what works best for your brand. You've got to measure that against the investments that you can make, the time for deployments. There's a number of different factors that come into those decisions. And, I know we're going to kind of debunk a number of those paths today, but there are those other considerations. Technology can be expensive. It can be time intensive. It can, have a significant impact on kind of your BAU, right? Your business as usual. So I think all of those things can come into play for a brand, and there's definitely no one size fits all. You've got to go and find what's the right path, what makes the most sense, and what are you ultimately trying to achieve.
And then on this note, how do you see brands approaching this? Because you guys saying testing is really important. Don't commit to one. Do you see brands testing one after the other? Do you see them testing multiple solutions at the same time? What are some of the patterns you've seen?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think, Andrew kind of touched upon it, right? We've been talking about third-party cookie deprecation for what seems like an eternity, but really what we're asking here is, what is that path to cookieless advertising? And I think that is still really in its infancy. It's not fully baked out. It's not fully developed. There's new solutions. There's new technologies coming all the time. So when I give that some consideration, I go back to kind of, the diffusion of innovation, or, Roger's adoption curve. I think we've all seen various different iterations of it. But it really shows kind of the progress of a technology or a vertical, and splits it down into kind of easy to understand segments. And I think, ultimately, if we look at those segments, it will give us a really good idea of where brands are in that path and what they're doing. You start with the innovators, and they might be brands that are super tech savvy, always jumping on the next new technology, the next new thing, typically really forward thinking. So they might have been thinking about, cookie deprecation from, as soon as ATT was announced with Apple, right? And how that might impact their business and how they might want to change their you have that next segment, which is kind of like the early majority. Again, looking at that kind of disruption that they want to bring to their business and help, and having technology kind of leverage that. You've got the late majority who are, coming in at that next stage, right? They've seen, the innovators, the early adopters, the early majority kind of get into that market, and they start to feel the pain of the challenge that all of these technologies are trying to solve. And, whether it's a case of burying their head in the sand or, just not being in a position to move forward, they're kind of that next wave. And then of course you have the final, it always feels like a really harsh word. I don't know why, but the laggards, that are kind of, super late to the party. And so I think if you think about this in the cookieless path, and we touched on some of those technologies, already, but those innovators and those early adopters, I think had a real good sense of the value of first party data. They maybe had started collecting first party data. They maybe already had an abundance of first party data. And what they probably were looking at is, right, we've got all this data. Do we really understand our customer? Do we really understand our profile of our customers? Do we have a single view of our customers, as we think about how we reach them in the future? And that's where, something like a CDP becomes really valuable and really powerful. To help understand that, right? And they've probably adopted in that technology, and there's been a big proliferation in terms of CDPs out there on the marketplace. They're then thinking about, right, okay, so now we have that single view. We are starting to see the impact on addressability with third-party signal loss. What are our options?
Yeah, thinking about the way you responded to that, Dan, in terms of like the different, approaches and uncertainty, I think it really brings me back to the idea that you need to be very structured in your approach, right? Because this is such a huge area and such a so many different things with so many people that are like kind of over promising, right? Like a lot of people are like, everybody's, faking it till they make it and try to over promise. And so it's a tricky thing. And so I think the really important thing is, because the space is inherently so unstructured and the news comes so fast, that like in your own thinking, you have to be very structured. Like I think back at like consulting companies, right? When you hire a consultant to come in, right? Like they kind of just feed information back to you that you already know in some sense, right? Maybe that's too cynical of you of what consulting companies do, but I think it provides valuable service because they do it in an extremely structured way, right? It brings back to first principles. What are your actual business problems? What are your that sort of super high level thinking about like why am I even looking at ID solutions? What is this trying to solve for me? Like what is my investment in context, and just having that starting from what do I need for my business, not starting from what's out there and just running, hitting the ground running before you have a plan. I think having the plan in place, almost sort of scientifically rigorously, I have a hypothesis, I'm going to test it, rather than I'm going to muck around and see what I can pull up, is a really important part of the approach. Because I think, it's very easy to get caught up in these things and chase down all these paths and, not cycle back. And I was thinking, Ashley, your original question was what do you see brands doing? And I have seen a couple times in my own personal experience where, there's something that looks promising, and then it gets an item on the roadmap, and then people are delivering against the roadmap and the whatever. And the testing and learning, there wasn't, they committed really early. And so I think that thinking about keeping options open and being really structured about the business decisions is super important. And that sort of consultant mindset about how am I going to structure stuff really, really nicely is a good way to go.
Yeah. I think the final group, right, and it would be remiss of us not to talk about it, is those late adopters, the late majority, or the laggards, right? And we kind of made an ode to third party cookie deprecation. There's been a lot of news around that recently. And there are a segment of brands and agencies that don't fall into any of these categories, right? It's kind of bury your head in the sand. It's a problem for later. We want to continue as is, and you do see a lot of brands not take that kind of path that we talked about, in terms of technology development, CDPs, contextual ID solutions, and they take the, dare I say it, the path of least resistance. And I think it's going to be challenging in the future for those type of brands, where, suddenly the problem will be there. Whether we see, the slow death of third party cookies, which is, ultimately where it's probably going to end up. It's not going away. And now is really the time to be thinking about your own brand's path and what, to Andrew's point, what makes sense, what is going to be your key priority, what is going to be your kind of test and learn priority. But you can't just always take the easiest route or the path of least resistance, because I think ultimately you're going to be left behind the crowd if you go that way.
Yeah. I think the other side of the least resistance is the momentum, right? I think a lot of brands continue to follow in the path that's most similar to how they used to do business. Right. It's least resistance, but in the context of where they came from. And I think that, you sort of have to resist that a bit, because things really are kind of rebooting, have already rebooted once. And so it's trying to take yourself out of the momentum, I think is another good way to frame that. Don't just follow the path because that's where the momentum's leading you. Think about, the whole picture, the holistic cost and the holistic benefit.
Yeah, on this note of finding, what works for your business, there's some brands we speak with that started testing out, taking contextual as an example. But the problem is that they have a product that everybody loves and everybody eats on almost a daily basis. So in these situations, they tried it. It was not very useful for them because who doesn't love this? I mean, take example of pizza, right? Everybody loves pizza. How are you going to find somebody who doesn't like pizza? It's going to speak to almost everyone. And in these situations, where are some areas in which these solutions fit better than others? So where are some places where contextual might be better? ID solutions might be better? Already off the bat, knowing these kinds of industries, availability of first-party data, etc., that all these different companies have.
So maybe we should go one by one and talk about where each one makes sense. Contextual is a good one to start with because it is sort of like, it's deeply historical, right? If you think about how you buy ads in the newspaper, like it's contextual, right? You either buy a section or you buy a specific paper or whatever. So I think that's the problem with contextual, though, is that it's not new and it's not doing, there's no edge really, like by default, right? Like, yes, you're an automotive manufacturer. You buy ads in the automotive section of the newspaper. Like, sounds like a fine, efficient buy or whatever, but it's the same buy that all your competitors are doing as well, right? So there's no edge. There's no thing. And so I think like some of the new excitement around contextual was to try to apply some of the same AI, machine learning tools that had been applied in a more user-centric view and trying to apply those to contextual, like to do better than just automotive, done. Try to do a little bit better and try to, do some regressions and some more advanced machine learning stuff. And I do think we're still scratching the surface with that, especially if you think about, the sort of like generative AI, large language model stuff. I think the ability to classify text and get, stuff that you can optimize against, there's still lots of ripe stuff, and that I'm sure there's lots of hidden things to be discovered that people might be like, oh, actually, people who are in the market for cars play a lot of golf. So, I think there's tons of those insights that, that one, who knows, right? But I think that there's all sorts of surprising things, and this is something we see too. And like when in our business, when we see stuff, like sometimes the correlations are surprising in terms of what kind of things. And even in a purely contextual context, I think there's lots of opportunity there, and so there is excitement. I think like there's excitement there, but it's tricky for a brand because I think the brand doesn't have a ton of control over that. But like experimenting with publishers that are trying to do cooler, newer stuff with contextual, I think, there's definitely still like the default strategy of just doing contextual doesn't offer much benefit, but I still think there's low hanging fruit in that area that's only just beginning to be mined, discovered, harvested.
Yeah, I completely agree, Andrew. I see, loads of, contextual based agencies, publishers moving to develop their, contextual offerings. And, you're seeing a really big advancement in that. I think I probably started with the really basic concept, but there's definitely, a lot of room, that contextual can grow. And it comes down to, where are those, white spaces of opportunity within contextual. And I think really quickly we start seeing that develop at a greater pace as well. And it can be super interesting for a brand. It falls back into, it's probably something you might want to consider testing to see if it's a good fit for you. It won't always be, I personally deal with a lot of CPGs and resale businesses, and, the user case isn't necessarily there, but there's plenty of different, user cases depending on, on your brand, your products, your service offering. And it's going to be a space that kind of continues to develop, I think.
Yeah, one last thought on contextual is that it's super useful, especially for brands that don't have any opportunities to get first-party data, where like first-party data is very few and far between and hard to track. Like you talk about a pizza, let's say like a global pizza chain or something like that, right? So, it's really hard potentially to track between, if they're not ordering online, like, seeing ads for pizza and then going in and ordering it. Or buying it or something. So I think in the case of those brands where like there's just like no opportunity, there's no point of sale that's going to help them with that. There's no frequent shopper card. There's nothing. I think like for them, contextual is super exciting. But it's also worth thinking about like for some of those like super broad market things where everybody is a potential customer, sometimes it's maybe less about targeting and more about measurement and frequency capping and things like that. In terms of like, I think it's long been known in some of those industries, though, that like you don't necessarily need to single out, if everybody in the world might like your product, it's maybe less about targeting specific people because everybody likes pizza, but it's being more about like, don't show one person 300 ads for pizza, show 300 people one ad for pizza is really the key.
I don't know if this is super controversial, but I don't mind being on record, but pizza is actually my least favorite cuisine. Yeah, it always has been. My 5-year-old loves it, so I eat it more often these days. But it's it's always been my least go-to option in terms of when I order takeout or anything. So thought I'd throw that out there because we keep talking about everyone loving pizza.
We can turn this into the BBC show on popular opinion. I love that.
Yeah, there are other cuisines available. I should denote, but I think Andrew's exactly right. It's definitely going to grow. It's definitely going to offer some more interesting user cases.
Great. So we've covered contextual and some of the challenges that different kinds of brands face there. Now, another question is, do we see any brands taking shortcuts, let's say? So trying to apply one of these solutions that we've just mentioned and then hoping that it solves all of their cookieless challenges.
Yeah, great question. I think the kind of obvious call out here is the CDP, right? The customer data platform. There's a lot of things that CDPs can do, but there's also a few things they can't do. And, there's a little bit of market education that needs to go on. This is in no means a slight to CDPs. They provide a super powerful solution to a number of brands. When I think about, the deployment of a CDP, it's fantastic for being able to unify data. It's fantastic for being able to create a single customer view. So giving a business a real, kind of view on their customers and the profiles of their customers. You can actually deploy them to orchestrate your campaigns across the majority of the channels that you're advertising across. So when you think about it like that, they're a really powerful option for businesses. I think where the waters get muddied somewhat is with privacy and the actual use of first party data. And, that's part, a growing pain that we have across this kind of cookieless path. Privacy and security are thrown around quite a lot and often misinterpreted. But for me, what a CDP isn't is a privacy-centric platform that can be used for that activation of first-party data or sensitive data. I don't necessarily believe that they're really a secure environment for external data collaboration. So I think when you start thinking about the different needs and the different setups within a CDP, they're really strong in certain areas. But we do, to round off your question, we do see some brands thinking that CDPs are the answer for not only that single customer view, but also their, the privacy and security around activating on first party data. And I guess I challenge that notion.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think like CDP as the agent of the brand makes a ton of sense, right? CDP as like just a concentrated way for you as a brand to manage your own stuff and like, they're gonna run the show for you or whatever. Like a little bit like, I said agent, I was thinking of a user agent, but also like you think about like a media agency, right? Like the CDP is going to help you, do stuff that you could have done yourself, but it's just going to be simpler, easier, smoother, whatever. I think that makes a ton of sense. But the same way that like you wouldn't think of a media agency as being like a sharing platform, it is awkward to think of CDPs in that sense. Like the incentives are not super well aligned and it's not a big focus. So it's I think like a CDP makes a ton of sense if you don't already have a data warehouse. If you're not already doing a lot of the stuff that a CDP would do yourself, it can make a lot of sense to just outsource that, right? Like I'm not going to bother making all these connectors and doing all this data management stuff. I just want someone else to manage my data for me. It makes tons of sense. But I think going beyond that is not necessarily justified. And some of the things that I've heard people say CDPs can do. I sometimes find surprising that that's one of the claims being made.
And how do ID solutions fit into this as well?
Well, one thing I would say is that ID solutions, you talk about, shortcuts, ID solutions, definitely some people think like, oh, ID solutions are going to fix everything, right? ID solutions have it figured out. They've got it. It's all going to be fine as long as I just convert to this universal ID. And I think that's because it speaks to this like desire to like, oh, I'm going to set it at one thing and then I'm going to have good coverage. I'm going to like have a unified view of the user. It's going to be one thing. And I think the trick with ID solutions is sort of how do they get consent and what keys are they using to match stuff together? Because like with cookie deprecation, right? Like ID solutions, like it is already very hard to get IDs on people who are using WebKit, like, Safari type users. Even with the new Google thing, there's going to be this option. I would expect a lot of people are going to opt out of third-party cookies anyway, right? Even if it's not going to be mandated across the board, like there's going to be coverage issues. And so like, how do they do coverage is a super important issue. The other, important side of it is like, how do they get consent? You think about like universal ID solutions, a lot of them have some kind of like opt-in consent pop-up-y thing. And I think it's a smart way to do it. It makes sense. It's legally compliant. Like it's a responsible way to do it. But like, I think some people, I've heard people sometimes talk about ID solutions like it's a trick, it's a gimmick. It's like, oh, I don't need consent, right? Like something about how something happens. Oh, it's totally anonymous now because I converted to a third-party ID. And I think that's not really realistic, nor is it supported by, some of the stuff I've heard about legal stuff, like, even if you've transferred it into some other type of ID, the fact that it's still about an individual person. And I think you may get in trouble thinking that like, just because I translated to this third party ID, so it's no longer personal data, job done. I think that kind of stuff, is still prevalent. And I think in the future, it's very unlikely that will hold water, right? If it's still an individual ID that someone can link back, it's still, you can still single people out, and it's not a very strong privacy angle.
So of course, us at Decentriq, we are a clean room ourselves. So just curious, where do you guys see clean rooms fitting into the brand's testing journey now? How do you think that they should go about this? Curious about your thoughts.
I have one quick comment. Is that of all the uncertainty and all the vastness and whatever, data clean rooms is perhaps the most, misunderstood, least agreed upon term in terms of like, what is a data clean room and what makes it up? Because for some people, data clean room is a DIY approach. And it's like the idea of a data clean room is, I can write my own queries. And that's an important part of data clean rooms. And so most data clean rooms, including us, have embraced that aspect. For some people, data clean room is about security and privacy and purpose limitation. And I think data clean rooms have embraced that to different levels. And for some other people, data clean rooms, are basically synonymous with like special access to data. And so, the way in which that's true, I think varies by different clean rooms. So I think it's, in terms of diversity of solutions, like even more than ID solutions, I think data clean rooms are diverse in that they're not necessarily even trying to solve the same problems and go at it with the same approaches.
Yeah, I think that's a super relevant point, right? If you think about, we've talked about previously in different podcasts that, the walled garden clean rooms and the role they play versus, kind of the independent ones. For me, I think, to bring this back, data clean rooms can sit as that kind of joining force between ad tech and martech that businesses are going through, right? We talked about how CDPs and DCRs and the data clean rooms, we love an acronym in this industry. Sorry, I won't do it again, I promise. But how data clean rooms can, combined with a CDP can really become a powerful option, how they can be combined with ID solutions to become a super powerful option. So, they're great if you've taken your business down that journey of those technologies. For me, though, if we want to truly answer where they fit in this cookieless path, if you have first-party data as a business, or you know that first-party data of a retailer or a more traditional data partner like Experian would be valuable to you, you can 100% start a data collaboration program, a cookieless program today without the need for an ID solution, without the need for a CDP. Combined, they're super powerful. But, I think the role of collaboration and clean rooms can be taken advantage of now, and really start helping you combat that signal loss, putting your data to better work and driving better results on your advertising.
Yeah, I think it's an important point, and the one of the keys with data clean rooms is that it is like data from multiple parties, right? Is that it is fundamentally a collaborative space, and so things where a lot of other things have tried to solve privacy by sort of like anonymizing, grouping, whatever. In data clean rooms, things stay often at an individual level up until the point of output, right? So that whereas some other solutions may only be able to do like remarketing, retargeting, with a data clean room, it may be more possible to do like lookalikes to increase reach or find bigger audiences. And I think that difference in privacy narrative is super important in terms of like, especially data clean rooms that take really strong privacy stances. The idea that you may be looking at more granular, the whole point is that the processing can happen on more granular data for longer, so the things can be more accurate and do approaches that just aren't possible if you just, put everything into a Bloom filter up front or just aggregate everything up to 100 up front. Like, a lot of these more advanced things are simply not possible. And so I think data clean rooms really provide a really unique approach for that.
Okay, and now on the side of complexity, because there's complexity I see on 3 different levels when it comes to implementing these kinds of cookieless solutions: business complexity, legal complexity, and technical complexity. And while we have you on the line, Andrew, I'm curious about your take on, those for our technical listeners out there. What is it like in terms of the complexity of implementing these different ones into your current tech stack?
I think it's a good point. I think because the technical complexity can vary a lot, and what plays with what and who plays with who with whom is pretty important. So I do think one thing to be a bit wary of, and that can be frustrating for people, is that a lot of these solutions might not always talk to each other perfectly, in the sense of like, you want to use a specific CDP, you want to use a specific ID solution, they may not talk well together. And I think that's one of the, that ability to integrate up and down the tech stack, certain decisions affect other decisions. And so I think that interrelatedness is one of the things that I think when I was calling for, a very structured, disciplined approach to how you think about the trade-offs that you're making and what things you're investing in. I think it's a really important thing, is to think about, if I go into a one-size-fits-all solution, if I try to take a shortcut and do something that's like going to fix all my problems, that may limit my ability to go into an ID space. Whereas if I picked a little more DIY-ish playground, I can modify things as I go solution, that can give me more opportunities maybe in the future to try new things and to test out new stuff. And I don't have to sort of buy the whole stack at once. So I think that ability to be a little bit flexible and not lock in too hard is really valuable. I think when I think about technical integration, the costs can vary wildly, of course, right? The more DIY, the more data science support you need on your side, the more you need to invest in understanding the data and the technology. But the lock-in I worry about a lot when I think about these tech solutions and the decisions I'd be making as a brand. I think that's my biggest fear, is becoming too reliant and then on one thing, or not being able to test out other things. And so which is one of the reasons why I think a diverse approach and a trying to make sure that I don't could become completely reliant on one ID thing that's gonna just lock me out of everything. I think that matters. Or just completely reliant on one approach, and that's I think people do know this, though. I think publishers are very wary of this kind of thing, where they know that if you give one player a lot of market power, it can cause bad incentives.
Yeah. So, we love to use the analogy here at Decentriq of a Swiss Army knife, giving our Swissness. But from what I'm seeing, what we've talked about in this episode, lots of pros and cons to both, the importance of testing for both. So on this end, I really see this applying for this topic as well. So brands really should approach this whole, how do I fix this whole cookieless problem, the addressability issues that I'm facing with this, multi-toolbox.
Yeah, I think it's a good metaphor, though, honestly, right? Like one way to summarize a lot of things we've been talking about so far in this episode is that, if all you have is a hammer, a lot of things start looking like a nail. And so equipping yourself with a Swiss Army knife, I think, gives you a much more nuanced view of what all the different things that you may be interacting with are. So I think that's a good stance. And I really do think this is an area of particularly a lot of disruption, right? In the last 5 years, certainly, right? The level of disruption, like the ad industry is always being disrupted, but in the last 5 years, certainly it's been disrupted more than average. And so I think this is not a good time to put your head down and hammer out. This is a good time to keep your head up and considering your options and having lots of tools in your Swiss Army knife to just be able to react to things as they change.
I love the Swiss Army knife analogy, Andrew, and I think it can be a combination of technologies, right? CDPs, clean rooms, very complementary, create actually a really powerful solution when they're joined together. Same with ID solutions. You can do a lot of things with ID solutions, but can you do those lookalikes? Can you do that measurement? Can you do that audience enrichment? The answer is no, but together with a clean room, you can have a very, very powerful proposition. So I think and each brand, and we talked about this a lot, right? Each brand has to go through that journey, but together that kind of toolkit or that Swiss Army knife of different technologies can really help drive a brand, down that cookieless path, now and for the future as well. And I think when you think about that cookieless path, it's really putting the consumer at the heart of what you do and their privacy at the heart of everything you do. And it's a journey that I'd implore brands to certainly consider if they haven't already considered.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Dan. Thank you, Andrew, for giving your insights in this episode. I hope you guys, as listeners, really enjoyed it. My biggest takeaway was that Dan is part of that 1% that doesn't like pizza. I haven't met many of you in the world.
Please don't judge me.
Well, yes, hope to see you in the next one. Thanks, everyone.